My history of literacy starts when I was a young child reading with my mother on the bed. Way back then, reading was a pain. It was nearly impossible for me to decipher the strange markings on the paper. To me, reading the simple word car was like trying to understand some complex language that only really smart people can understand. Eventually, I was able to read and understand what the words meant, but it was still difficult for me since I was very young. My family would sit on the couch, and out would come my mother with a book in hand. I knew exactly what was going to happen, so I would hide. Since I put up a struggle, my dad would get angry and yell at me until I went with my mom to read. As I got older, I did not perform well in school, and my grades reflected it. My grades improved at about the time my parents started giving me money for good grades. I wonder why. Because of this, I eventually began to enjoy reading and would go out and try to read books on my own. In the fourth grade, I got the urge to read The War of the Worlds, with a little input from my brother. But I went to the library, and the librarian denied me, saying the book was too far above my level, so I didn't read it. Then one day I saw an Indian kid at my grade level reading that same book. We were both on the same intellectual level, but apparently he was good enough to read the book and I wasn't. That sent me up a tree. I vowed to never have anybody tell me I couldn't do something again. I started to read ferociously. In the sixth grade, there were reading raffles where for each book read and report written on the book completed, I would receive a raffle ticket. There would be a raffle at the end of each 3 weeks. No matter how many books I read, I couldn't win. So I got desperate. I would grab a book that I wasn't even interested in and read it and complete a report just to get a ticket to win the raffle. I read so much that I made the opposite of progress with my literacy. I lost interest in reading altogether. I finally did end up winning the raffle, but all I got was a stuffed panda which I gave to my mom. Over the next few years, I did the bare minimum reading possible. I read for class and nothing else. It wasn't until my senior year in high school that I began to read again. We had to read numerous, still boring books, and write basically a paper a week. This really had no impact on my interest in reading, but it made me think about what I used to enjoy doing. Reading books that piqued my interest and loved doing it. I had a small stack of Brian Jakes books in my room one day, and I just stopped and stared at them. This sent me over the top. I remembered how much I loved to read about medieval battles where the characters are fuzzy woodland creatures, and I yearned for that feeling again. Because of those fond memories, I started to read again. Though I was reading again, my taste in books had changed to more intellectual books that tested the mind more. Books by Machiavelli and Karl Marx. Books that expanded the way one thinks. I read the Sherlock Holmes books, and as I read each individual story, I would try to solve the problem at hand before Sherlock would have his great reveal and put all the clues in place to create a logical description of how he would come to his solution to the problem. Eventually, as I reached the final few stories, I was able to solve the problem based on the details provided, and that made me ecstatic. I was so happy I could do that, but I was still no Sherlock Holmes though. I used to love reading, but I started to lose track of what made reading interesting for me, so I lost interest in reading altogether. Eventually, though, after some downtime, the love is back and it's stronger than ever.